Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Elections Town Hall meeting of the American Bar Association Young Lawyers Division. In the fall of 2018, the Young Lawyers Division formed the Election Guidelines Working Group to update the YLD's election guidelines. This group is comprised primarily of the current YLD speaker, the current YLD clerk, as well as others who have aged out of the division with a focus on past speakers, as the speakers are the ones who administer the division's elections. The original goal of the working group was simply to update the guidelines. For instance, our guidelines talk about postage, but don't talk a lot about electronic mail or candidate websites or things of that nature. And so the goal was to provide some much needed updates to those guidelines. As a part of that effort, the working group solicited feedback from division members concerning the elections, things that they thought were going right with elections, as well as things that they thought could be improved upon. The overwhelming majority of the feedback that the working group received concerned the current timeline with respect to our elections, particularly the fact that we have year-long elections. And so we wanted to host this town hall to give individuals an opportunity to weigh in on how the YLD currently runs its elections and how where we have room for improvement. This town hall is being recorded, and it will be posted to the division's website via YouTube sometime next week. With that, I am actually going to turn it over to ABA YLD Assembly Clerk Jamie Davis, who is going to moderate today's town hall.
Well, thank you everyone for attending the town hall. Madam Speaker and I really, wanted to provide this forum so others can give input and can give some feedback as well. As she stated earlier, it's really important for the division to get that so we can move forward with updating the election guidelines. So we want to just kind of start, and it is a town hall, so we want to get, of course, the questions are open, and we want your feedback, right? We want to have dialogue so that we can get this insight and take some notes as well so we can provide this to council. So the first question that I wanted to pose to the group is kind of what are thoughts on the current year-long election timeline, right? With candidates being able to declare at the fall of gavel at the annual assembly. So as soon as the gavel falls at the annual assembly, candidates are then allowed to declare. And then and then the slate closing at the fall of gavel at the mid-year assembly. And then elections occurring that following August. So basically, you can declare at the fall of gavel at annual, and then of course the elections will occur at annual that next year. So just kind of wanted to get thoughts on that current year-long timeline, and just wanted to get insight from the group.
Good afternoon. This is Anthony Scioli, Virgin Islands. I believe that the current one-year election cycle is far too long. Quite frankly, I'm not aware of anyone who's ever described the one-year election as a positive. I believe that it would be a lot better for everyone if it was condensed to be ideally a 6-month cycle or even less. I think the current practice of allowing individuals to declare right at the fall of the assembly gavel is, I think, actually too soon to have declarations. I feel like there should at least be a bit of a gap between the conclusion of the annual meeting and when elections for the following year start. As it is right now, you literally have people running up to give their declarations to the speaker and the administrative director of the staff director of the YLD, right, and the secretary right before the literally that second. And I think that's absolutely ridiculous. Technically, the ABA annual meeting hasn't even ended yet. You still have the ABA House of Delegates meeting going on. And yet you have definitely have people actively campaigning, you have people emailing people for endorsements right away, like a marathon, people doing it before people even have a chance to perhaps even get to know the candidates, know who's running. It's chaotic. So I'd at least have there be some a bit of a delay in terms of when you can actually declare, perhaps September 1st. So they don't have people immediately declaring and campaigning before the current meeting you're in is even over. Beyond that, I think that there's the deadline in order to go and the deadline to declare your candidacy should be a lot sooner. I believe it should be at the conclusion of the fall meeting or right before the fall meeting. Beyond, and again, I believe that you don't really need a 6-month period to decide whether you're going to run for office, and then have the actual election be at the mid-year meeting instead of the annual meeting. And there's several reasons for that. First, it gives whoever wins the election is going to have more time in order to actually prepare for the office to which they've been elected. We've had contested elections for a position of secretary where literally the person gets elected and then you're told, hey, you're elected secretary, now give us your lab appointments, your membership board appointments right now or within the next couple of days. And so you're scrambling to fill these appointments that you didn't necessarily even know you had at the very last minute. And it's also fair for the people who lose the election, because if you lose the election, it's contested. If you lose at mid-year, it doesn't preclude you from applying for an appointment. As it is right now under the current system, if the election is contested, you miss the appointments process, you end up losing in August, well, guess what? You're off council and you're probably not getting a funded appointment unless whoever happens to be the incoming chair saves something for the loser, which isn't always the case. And as a result of that, we've lost quite a few division leaders who probably could have, given up the division and been productive members, but unfortunately we're unable to because no one's going to go and apply for appointment when they're in a contested election. And quite frankly, they're probably not going to get a cabinet level appointment in that situation if they did apply. And in addition to that, the mid-year meeting is more convenient for the individuals who are voting in the election. Mid-year is the funded conference for the ABA-YLD. And so, as opposed to annual, which is not funded by the ABA. And so as a result, attendance at the ABA annual assembly tends to be those affiliates who are either able to fund their delegates or whose delegates are able to self-fund. And so I think you tend to have a less representative group actually voting at annual than you would at mid-year. And so South Central being our proposal, left field having to be essentially a 6-month election cycle. You can't declare until September 1st. Declarations end at either the start or the end of the fall conference, and voting occurs at mid-year. Thank you.
Hey, this is Cabell, North Carolina, if we're saying states. I had not talked with Anthony previously to this, but I actually fully agree with pretty much everything he just said. And that was my same thoughts as well, was that it's just overwhelming and a lot that the moment the fall of the gavel happens, you're then getting bombarded with folks about for the next year. And I think especially for new members who are getting involved for the first time that year, it's a little overwhelming. So I like the idea of giving that kind of grace period, just the month till September 1. I also think that there's a lot of advantages to keeping people engaged and helping them prepare for the next year by having the election at mid-year. I think we've seen multiple times, as Anthony said, where there's a contested election. They still have time left, obviously, and they still have great additions to the YLD, but because they didn't get the spot, there's now a spot left on cabinet, and so it's just kind of, how do we put them to use? And so if you did it at mid-year, you have more time for them to do appointments, and then also, as Anthony said, for the other folks to prepare. And then it kind of gives people 6 months off from these darn elections before we roll into the next one. And I think having that gap will then make people take the elections a little more seriously than just kind of be like, why are we always literally 365 days a year having to deal with these elections? And I like closing at fall candidates.
This is Shada. I agree with everything that's already been said for basically the exact same reasons. The only other thing that I would add, I'm not in favor of a longer election period. The one, to offer a contrary perspective, the one downside I see is it has sometimes been difficult for me to either give an endorsement or frankly take a given candidate seriously, because I find that they are gung-ho about the position for which they are running, and obviously running for it early because I have to, and inevitably all of them have a position in the existing year. And what I would really like to do is evaluate not just their positions for the like their arguments for the position for which they're running, but how they're doing in the position in which they're currently in. And this is a separate conversation, so I won't take up a bunch of people's time on this today. But I generally find it pretty distasteful when if we have a candidate who has a relatively senior position in leadership and is therefore funded to attend conferences, who is running for a position who's not taking their current position as seriously as basically anybody else is or should be. So if wherever the timeline gets tweaked, if it's a shorter duration and the time period is moved to a different part of the year, I would love if they could incorporate some period of time in which that prospective candidate has also fulfilled their current position.
Do we have any other feedback?
This is Matthew Kerpis. I missed the first 5 minutes. I was trying to get my thing to work. Sorry. I caught Anthony when he was mostly through his thing, but I didn't even realize this is what we were discussing today. But I think it's a great idea. Although I do think we should at least consider the possibility that closing people announcing at the fall meeting might be too soon. Maybe there might be, because you might get some people at the fall meeting, that's their first meeting, maybe they've been practicing for a few years, they're getting back involved, and they have to make a decision at that meeting when they're first sort of becoming aware of opportunities for things. I think maybe there's a grace period. I don't know what that should be, but I think you have to at least consider that. That would be my only input. Generally speaking, I think it's a great idea.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you all for your feedback on that question. The second question is kind of what are the pros and cons of moving to a 6-month election timeline? I know a few of you kind of went into a few of my questions actually already, but if we can just, if others maybe can kind of give their pros and cons, so we can kind of just get that more on the record.
Hi, this is Anthony. I don't want to monopolize the discussion, but since no one else is jumping in on this, just to respond to to Matthew's observation about potentially having it if you close it during fall, then you're maybe precluding individuals from who are new to the division or have taken time off from declaring. Personally, I kind of see that as actually a benefit of transitioning to a 6-month cycle, because quite frankly, and look, this is my personal opinion, I think if you're brand new to the division, you probably shouldn't be declaring for elective office in the first place. And so from my perspective, anything that would discourage individuals just declaring, for the sake of declaring, I think would actually be a benefit to it, and having the benefit of having a 6-month cycle. And again, to the extent such individuals might wish to consider, might end up declaring for an office that ends up being contested, I think the 6-month cycle would actually benefit them, because they still have the opportunity to apply for appointment to the extent they lose that election. So that'll just be my take on in terms of the pros and cons that haven't already been discussed.
So does anyone have a con of moving to a 6-month election timeline?
This is Cabell. I think, if you were to try to focus on what a con would be, I think in some ways it's similar to what Shada said, was that if we just have the election cycle be that first 6 months of the year, there's less incentive for people to continue to do a good job and follow through on their current appointment. So, I think right now people don't have to make up their minds till all the way till annual, and so they do. There is an incentive for them to do well the whole year, so that can be part of evaluated and part of why they should be elected. Similarly, I think the other con of having it right for the first 6 months is not necessarily that people who aren't familiar with the division can't run, because I do agree with Anthony that in realistically they shouldn't be running if they are familiar with the division for one of these key officer spots. There's more be going through appointments. But it also doesn't give them a lot of time to understand what the positions are, what the hierarchy is, who the players are and whatnot before they have to even vote at mid-year. And even before people start calling them for endorsements. I know I have a scholar on my team this year who, like, I had set up a call with her just to talk about being on the civic engagement team, but it very quickly evolved into her just wanting a lowdown of, like, so what are these election things? Why do people keep contacting me? What do I do? What is this? She's like, I don't even know what's going on. And so I think that would be a con. Personally, I think the pros outweigh those cons, but they are definitely cons, you know, just to be aware of and see if there's ways that they could be mitigated.
Okay. Thank you for that feedback on some pros and cons. I do appreciate that. So I know some kind of proposals were just kind of put out in the first question, but you know, if the division was to move to a six-month election timeline, basically, as of now, we're looking at two primary options. The first is to have members declare their candidacy at the fall of gavel at the annual assembly, and then have the election at mid-year. And then the second option would be to have individuals declare the fall of gavel at mid-year and then have the elections at annual. So I know some discussion was already had regarding that, but can I please have some other insights on the merits of those two options?
All right, it's Anthony again, since no one else is jumping in. I believe, as I mentioned in my remarks, I believe that it really shouldn't be the fall of the gavel for either assembly. I really think that it needs to have some sort of breathing room. And so to the extent you stick with annual, I think it needs to be September 1st. September 1st is tied to the ABA's fiscal year. It's when the other appointments technically go into effect. And so I think that might be and it's also when your eligibility to be a young lawyer also resets. That's based on September 1st and not the fall of the gavel. So I'd strongly recommend that to the extent we stick with having to be there in the first 6 months of the year, that you actually not be able to declare until September 1st. To the extent you're considering letting people declare at the end of mid-year, I think that system would still be better than the system we have now. But I think it would not be as good as having it during the first 6 months of the year, because a lot of the benefits of the change are not going to be realized if it's a mid-year to annual election cycle. The first one is that the election is going to overlap with appointments. And so you still have a situation where the loser of the election, if it's contested, is essentially precluded from the appointments process, unless we change the way the appointments process is done. But I think that's going to be a much harder change to effectuate than changing the election cycle. And in terms of the winner of the contested election, again, if they get elected at annual, they're still going to have far less time to prepare for that position in terms of making their appointments and otherwise getting ready to assume the new role. And so for those reasons, I think it'll be a lot better to have it be the first 6 months of the year as opposed to the last 6 months of the year.
This is Matthew Kurbis again. I just had Anthony, I'm not sure if you said it. I'm kind of working and listening, so I do apologize if I'm repeating anything that's being said, but you made me think of something to address the con that is brought up, how people are going to sort of sit back and once they know that they've won, not do anything for 6 months. If it's the first 6 months that we're talking about, isn't it possible to just have the election and not announce the results? Well, I guess then that defeats the purpose of people applying to liaison positions. But I don't know, maybe there's some healthy middle ground there. But I'm certainly in favor of what's been proposed for the 6 month time frame that we're talking about.
So then what was your idea then of announcing it later? What would be the timeline that you were thinking?
I mean, I concur with Anthony ultimately, but I do think that there should be some kind of leeway if we're I always prefer contested elections to uncontested elections. So I mean, if you're going to be revamping the process, say if only one person announces for a position, I would love for there to be some kind of contingency in there where someone could still announce up to a certain date to have an opposed election. I think it makes people bring their A game more if they're running unopposed. So I mean, I know there are a lot of potential cons to that, but I think it's something that should at least be considered. And I got to run. I got a deposition, but enjoy the rest of the call.
Thank you. Okay, so I will go on to the next question. Is there anyone else that has any input? Okay. So I also wanted to get some, if you can kind of provide your thoughts on the value and some of the pitfalls of allowing candidates to publish their public endorsement list, whether it is via their website, whether it is on their campaign materials that's given out during the conferences. But I just kind of wanted everyone's thoughts on kind of what they think are pros and cons, even of allowing candidates to publish a public endorsement list.
This is Cabell. I hate the endorsement list. I think it makes it look like kind of a popularity contest. I think it's a result of why we get all of those calls and emails and whatnot, wanting people to make a decision right off the bat as quickly as possible. And so I understand that there's some, I would rather have people standing on their positions and letting people make a decision based on that versus knowing like, oh, well, I should support so-and-so because Cabell endorsed so-and-so. There's always going to be people talking behind the scenes saying like, yeah, this is who I'm supporting, this is who I'm not. And that, I think that is fine, but I think I don't see much upside personally to the public endorsement list. Yeah.
Hi, this is Anthony. I partially agree and partially disagree with what Cabell just said. I do see value in the endorsement list itself, and in general, I'm a supporter of there being more speech as opposed to less speech. And to the extent people want to get endorsements, and to the extent people want to give endorsements, I think that's perfectly fine. I think the big problem is the endorsement process, and I think that's where really probably at least 75% of the complaints about endorsements comes from. And I think several of us have identified it in terms of people immediately getting phone calls, getting emails the second the fall of the gavel happens at assembly and the second people declare. I think there are ways to have the endorsement process be a little bit more orderly and less chaotic. I think you'd probably see some improvements again if you have declarations be on September 1st as opposed to the fall of the gavel, because at least have some breathing room between the conference and when the election starts. I also think that you probably should not be able to get endorsements until the end of the candidate declaration period, because look, we've had several elections that start out uncontested. A person gets several endorsements and then someone else declares, and now you're in an awkward position where candidate A got a bunch of endorsements when it was uncontested, but now candidate B is in the election trying to get those endorsements. And I think it'd be a much better situation where you can declare on September 1st, but you can't get endorsements until, let's say, the end of the fall conference or some other date, at which point the slate is certain. And at that point, once you know everyone who's in the election and you know no one else is going to be able to jump in, then you can approach people for endorsements. It also has the benefit of there being at least several months where the individuals are maybe aware of the candidates, maybe aware of their campaigns, maybe have seen them at the fall conference or seen them at annual, and get a sense of the candidates as a person, get a sense of maybe how they're doing in their positions. And so it's not a situation where you've literally never been to a conference before in your life, you're a brand new DR, and all of a sudden you get bombarded by 6 different people in 3 different contested elections trying to get your endorsement. So I think that it's not going to solve all the problems, not going to get rid of all the complaints, but I think it would greatly reduce some of the worst parts of the endorsement process. So there's at least some order to it in that regard, and not a big rush to send a bunch of emails the second that assembly adjourns at annual.
Yeah, this is Rick Davis, and hey, I do like the endorsements. I know when I came in as a DR and didn't know a whole lot of people, I get the comment about it being a popularity contest, but it at least gave me some bearing to say, okay, well, this is someone I've met, I've talked to, I think they know what they're doing, and, maybe that's why this candidate might be worthy of my support over others. But I agree with Anthony and I think in my experience, what I've seen other ABA entities do it this way, that you have to declare, but that endorsements don't come until down the road. I think that's what I would be in favor of, is that there's a different deadline and you cannot have a public supporter or endorsement until after that later deadline down the road, but that we don't completely eliminate that part of the process.
So when we think, and just trying to get some more insight, when we think about, you say later down the road, what is the timeline there? Are you, thinking, just to get some more insight?
I don't know that I have a specific suggestion on that. I mean, I think if it's a 6-month timeline, maybe it's 3 months down the road or something like that. I think it should be a good enough ways down the road that people can have conversations without seeing the popularity list on the but I don't know that I have a specific timeline in my mind.
Yeah, what I might propose is pick a deadline maybe where you can start soliciting endorsements, let's say at the end of the fall conference, assuming that's the deadline to declare, and then maybe make it so you can release endorsements on, let's say, November 1st or December 1st. So you don't necessarily have or some to that effect. Because if we move to a 6-month cycle, then essentially the effect of that would be that you're only publishing an endorsement list at a conference, let's say on essentially the mid-year meeting. So in terms of materials that list endorsements, you're going to have that be greatly reduced. And then during the off season, let's say November, December, January, you might just be releasing endorsements on a website. So if I had to propose something, I think it would probably look something like that.
Thank you, Anthony, for that. Does anyone else have anything regarding that question or? Okay. Seeing none, I also want thoughts on really opening up voting to all division members via internet voting, as opposed to only division delegates that are at the conferences.
How would you verify that people are only voting once and all of that via internet? Have we thought through those mechanisms?
Well, this is something I even talked to staff about, and they do have, if that is right, it's something that we're interested in. There's a system that they've used in the past for opening up just for division members via internet that only you are able to vote once, from what I was told. Sarah or Austin, do you want to comment?
Before, this is Gackery, before we do that, I really want to keep this very general instead of going into specifics. So for instance, if the comment is that, for instance, I like the idea of opening up to all members as long as we can make sure that people are only voting once, as opposed to getting into particulars right now. If we can just have that caveat, so if you have a caveat or if you want to say, well, this is a good idea pending whether we are able to implement this other measure or this other protection, then if we can just keep it that way as opposed to going into how and what mechanisms and what software and things of that nature, just keep it a little more general with respect to this particular call.
That's fine, Dackery. This is Cabell. I wasn't looking for logistics. I think it's more in lines with, this is the first time I've heard that proposed at all. And so my thought process was, well, you got to make sure you can do it securely. And then giving that caveat, as you just said, if you can do it securely, I tend to be in favor of the more we can include the entire division and let them feel invested in the future of the division, which is what our officers are, then I think that is a good thing.
This is Anthony, and like Cabell, this is the first time that I've heard this proposal, so I haven't had a chance to fully get my thoughts together. But assuming we're talking about the entire division, i.e. the 100,000 plus members of the YLD who aren't law students, I have some concerns about this proposal. One thing that I can see happening immediately is that the amount of spam people are going to get is going to be tremendous. You're going to see these elections be very similar to ABA delegate large elections, where people are going to be sending mailers out to people, to random YLD members, tell them to vote. They're going to have campaigns become a lot more expensive as a result. They're going to have essentially some concern that it's come up in some past elections about how maybe government lawyers and those of public interest are even now maybe might have difficulty paying for the cost of a campaign. That's going to become exponential if it's opened up to literally 100,000 potential voters as opposed to the 200 or so we have right now. I'm also concerned that it's going to give disproportionate influence to candidates from large states such as California and Florida, in that they can essentially, focus on turning out the vote from their home states and from other large jurisdictions, and where small jurisdictions like the Virgin Islands, no one's going to care about us at all. No one's even going to approach us for endorsement. And so that would be my concern. Another concern would be that, we've talked about how people slack off their appointments now, potentially, how that might be a concern, or maybe don't know how people are in their appointments. I think that if you broaden it out to where 99.9% of the potential voters are people who've never even had to be at a WILD conference, I think you're going to see a lot more of that. Campaigns can be a lot more time consuming. If you think the number of phone calls and emails you have to do now is high, it's going to be even higher. And when you start bringing in people who've never actually been to a conference, who don't know the candidates, haven't seen the candidate's performance, they're probably going to see a lot more of that, where people just rely on your title and don't really have much of a performance to back it up, because there's going to be much of an incentive to put on a good performance when 99% of the voters are people who have no idea what you've done or what you should be doing. So I think it's something that needs a little bit more study, and I would hope that, I don't think it's necessarily the worst idea in the world, but I just have some serious concerns, and I would hope that this will be something that's maybe considered maybe a second or third wave of potential reforms as opposed to being done right now.
No, these are just questions that we're coming up with to get your insight. This is nothing that, has been really, like I said, discussed. We just create these questions. And when I said I talked to staff, just getting their thoughts on this, on one of the questions. So that was all that was about. Any other comments about either opening up to all division members or just opening or just continuing with our delegates? Okay, seeing none, are there any other comments, questions, concerns? With this town hall, we wanted to keep, because we're all very, very busy, we wanted to keep the meeting, the town hall, 45 minutes or less, which we've done that. But if there are any comments or concerns, that is the end of kind of our questions that we have for the members that have joined the call, and we appreciate you attending and providing your insight and your feedback. We are, like I said, we've taking notes, and this will be helpful as we continue to look into and as we gather information on the elections process. But I wanted to at least provide anyone, if they had anything else to comment or any questions before we wrap.
Hi, this is Anthony. I have two additional comments. That the first one actually ties on something I know Rick Davis has been passionately arguing for, so I kind of hope he'll chime in as well. But as we all know, there have been a lot of discussion about maybe changing the ABA WILD age of eligibility. To the extent that doesn't happen, I think that there needs to be something done about individuals who are non-traditional and are on the 5-year membership plan, who essentially it's pretty much impossible for any of those people to become chair just because of the logistics of how the election process works. I think there should be some serious look at maybe seeing if a 3-year track to be chair is truly necessary, whether you need to be secretary, chair-elect, and then chair, whether you need to be aged in for the entirety of that 3-year commitment. I know some affiliates, like Connecticut, for example, have shortened the chair track and have also enacted provisions that say that as long as you're aged in when elected to any position, you're aged in for the entire duration of that position. And so, for example, in Connecticut, you just need to be, when you're elected secretary, you only need to be aged in at a time you're elected secretary. You do not need to be aged in to be chair-elect or chair. And so that's got a little bit more diversity in terms of the individuals who run for elected office. I also think that I might want to take a look into whether you need to have every officer position right now, every Conrad position is a 2 or 3 year commitment. If there's some way to take a look at the feasibility, maybe having a 1-year officer position that I think would also be very helpful for individuals who maybe get involved in the ABA WALD a little bit later and want to be an officer, would like to run for something, but aren't necessarily able to commit to 2 or 3 years or potentially even more. That would be something I recommend. Rick will chime in and give his take on that, because assuming there's no changes to eligibility, I think it's something that needs to be addressed at some point. And in addition, I know this is a relatively niche issue. It doesn't really affect too many people, but I really think there needs to be some sort of written procedures or guidelines as to how to proceed when you have an officer or constitutional rep whose significant other or family member is a candidate for office. This obviously happened in my campaign. It's also something that may potentially go forward in a future campaign, given that we now have another set of individuals who are involved in WALD at a high level who are married. I think it's something that needs to be memorialized, so we have written procedures so everyone knows going in what the procedure is going to be, and so no one is surprised when it comes up, and no one is, you don't now put in a position where you need to do some ad hoc procedures as to how it should be. So that's my recommendations, and thank you, Dacre and Jamie, for having this town hall and for giving everyone the opportunity to be heard on these very important issues.
Thank you, Anthony. I appreciate your feedback. Are there any other comments or questions?
Since Anthony called me out, I'll respond. This is Rick. I think, from my perspective, I actually do like the multi-year track. Although it does limit non-traditionals, I think that this association is a large association and our division is a large division, and it takes time to get to know what you're doing. And I've seen that firsthand in my own experience. And so I actually do like the multi-year track. But I think that the resolution that I'm proposing would help to eliminate that issue of non-traditionals never being chair, because they could, have a longer period within the association. I also personally, although don't know if it directly relates, have no issues with a provision that you could continue in a position, as long as you're eligible on the day you start the position or whatever. I don't have any problems with that. But again, I like the multi-year track personally.
This is Cabell. In North Carolina, we did have the 3-year track where it was secretary, chair-elect, and chair, and decided that we wanted to go just to a 2-year where it's chair-elect, chair. And we do have it that as long as you are eligible when you're elected chair-elect, then you can go on to chair. So for example, I'm eligible, but will lose technically my eligibility as a general WILD member. We do it as if you're under 36 at the fall of the gavel, whatever, for our annual meeting. But because I'm currently chair-elect, it's okay, and I can be then chair and immediate past chair, even though that'll make me literally the oldest person in our division, minus people who've been practicing alternative methods. So I would be in support of something like that. But I do think that there's an advantage, as Rick said, since it's such a large division and there's so much to be gained by having that time to learn on keeping the 3-year track. Practically in North Carolina, we've still kept it. You just aren't guaranteed secretary to chair-elect, but typically the secretary always get elected chair-elect.
Thank you for your feedback. And like I said, we're taking notes, and we're definitely going to present this. But we appreciate everyone's feedback, because this has been really, 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 really insightful. If anyone doesn't have any other questions, like I said, we tried to keep it 45 minutes less. We'll go ahead and we'll end the call, but we do want to thank everyone for attending. This call has been recorded, and so it will be posted on our website, particularly the elections page, because like I said, we want to give everyone the opportunity to listen. And if they do have any questions or comments or concerns, they can definitely email our speaker, Assembly Speaker Dacre Steele. Dacre, do you want to provide your email as well, so if anyone has anything that they want to email?
Absolutely. Thanks, Jamie. I can be reached at dacre.steele@gmail.com. That's DAIQUIRI.STEELE le@gmail.com. And because there are a lot of letters, that's Delta Alpha India, Quebec Uniform India, Romeo India, Samantha Tiger, Echo Echo, Lima Echo @gmail.com. Thank you all for participating. I echo Jamie's gratitude. For those of you all who participated in real time and offered comments, should you have additional comments, because we know this is all you have to do is think about YLD elections, but should you have additional comments that you want to send in, feel free to send those to me via email. Also, for those of you all who are listening to the recording of this town hall, should you have a comment or question that you want to email in, feel free to send those to me as well. Thank you again for your time. We truly appreciate you. Special thanks to our staff directors, Austin Greathouse and Sarah Stretch, for assisting us with arranging this and facilitating this town hall. And with that, enjoy the rest of your day and have a great weekend. Bye-bye.